to content. In the case of thought, however, the route of access is exactly opposite. Our only point of contact with our own thoughts is through their content. Sarah thinks Daddy is home, that it's raining, that the dog is barking. Despite no awareness of the fact she thinks these things and no awareness of her own acts of thought, she is nonetheless fully aware of what she thinks, the content of these assorted thoughts. A few years later, Sarah will learn that there's something about or in her, something very personal. Everyone has their own thoughts, and private. One can keep one's thoughts to oneself, to which this propositional content is somehow attached. She first becomes aware of what she thinks, the proposition that her father is home, and later learns that this fact, or what she took to be a fact, was, so to speak, attached to her, but perhaps to no one else's thought. Unlike the fact that her father is home, it might even be false. Unlike a person saying, Daddy is home, a verbal action one can be aware of without understanding what is being said, one can be, and at 2 years of age, one is acquainted with what one is thinking while having no awareness or understanding of the act of thought itself. The mode of access is completely reversed. That's what's unique about your own thoughts. Your only access to them is through their content. Every other proposition, what someone says and so on, your route of access is through the act of saying it. This mode of access to one's own thoughts continues, of course, after one finds out one thinks. One learns about the age of 4 that people, including oneself, have these privately accessible thoughts. One becomes aware that one thinks, but in learning this, one doesn't become aware of one's own thoughts in any way other than the way one was aware of them before one learned this. The access is still via their content. The phenomenology of thinking doesn't change at the age of 4. One doesn't suddenly, at the age of 4, become aware of one's own acts of thought. One simply becomes aware, learns, comes to believe that such acts of thought must exist somewhere inside one for a thinker to have the thoughts she has, and to which each thinker has privileged access. Well, if this is indeed the mode of access we have to our own thoughts, doesn't this provide us with the answer to the question we've been struggling with? The question of what reasons do we have for thinking we think? The answer is everyone who thinks has a reason to believe he thinks because he is acquainted with a proposition, the content of his thought, which indicates the presence of the thought for which it is the content. So even a 3-year-old has reason to think they think. They just have to learn to use these reasons by learning to recognize as propositions, as the content of their own thoughts, the propositions they are and have been acquainted with all along. It's like learning at an early age that what one feels when hungry is in fact hunger. Since there's no special problem about what reasons we have for thinking we're hungry when we're hungry, there shouldn't be any special problem about what reasons we have for thinking we're thinking when we're thinking. It's the same story as about mom and dad teaching you, well, you must feel hungry by now, you haven't eaten yet. Unfortunately, though, thinking is not like hunger. When you're hungry, there's something you're aware of. Something you feel that indicates you're hungry. You feel hungry. Even when you don't know it's hunger, you feel. You have to be taught that that's what you feel. When you think, though, there's nothing you're aware of, nothing you feel that indicates you're thinking. What you're aware of, what you're acquainted with when you're thinking are propositions. And propositions, unlike the things you feel, do not indicate anything. Unlike facts, propositions can be false. And a false proposition does not increase the probability that anything else is true. False propositions are a dime a dozen. They're epistemically worthless. The proposition that pigs have wings, that's a perfectly respectable proposition, something a person might actually think, has absolutely no probative value. It certainly isn't a reason to think that pigs can fly. If it were, we'd all have reasons to think pigs can fly. What would be a reason to think that pigs can fly is if it were true that pigs have wings. If it were a fact that pigs have wings. Propositions, though, don't have to be true. They aren't facts. So Clyde's awareness of what he thinks, which is the proposition that pigs have wings, doesn't give him a reason to believe that pigs can fly, or even that pigs have wings. It doesn't give him a reason to believe anything. It certainly doesn't give him a reason to think that he thinks pigs have wings. And this is true even if what Clyde thinks is that he thinks. He needs a reason to think that this proposition is true in order to have a reason to think he thinks. And we're back to where we started, looking for reasons to think what think. What this means is that there's nothing we are aware of in thinking that indicates that we're doing it, that we're thinking. We're aware of what we think, and we enjoy a privileged form of awareness of this content, yes, but thought content is evidentially worthless. Privileged awareness of it makes one an authority on what one thinks. Yes, in the same way Sarah is an authority on what she thinks. But it doesn't make one an authority on the question of whether or not one is thinking. And that's what we're looking for, that kind of authority. What then is one's reasons, one's evidence for thinking one thinks? If our mode of contact with our own thoughts doesn't give us a reason to think we're having these thoughts, what does? Obviously, I haven't found anything. At least nothing one has privileged access to. Nothing one's neighbors and friends don't have equal access to. And since I can't think of anywhere else to look, I'm open to suggestions.